The Los Angeles Innocence Project has come on board to help find all the things that were ignored by the Modesto Police Department.
We heard that there had been a burglary next door.
The burglars may have abducted and killed Laci.
There's blood on a mattress in a van. Why didn't this get brought up?
This was exonerating evidence.
Convicted wife killer Scott Peterson is speaking out for the first time since his murder trial. What you saw there was the Peacock documentary Face to Face with Scott Peterson, and it drops today.
Why should anyone want to hear your side of the story?
Because I didn't kill my family.
Is a liar engaged in any...
Netflix has also released a documentary earlier this month, called American Murder, Laci Peterson, and it includes some interesting tidbits.
A detective revealed that the Peterson wanted food from In-N-Out Burger right after his arrest. John Bueller, a detective, said that they had picked him up down in San Diego area. They were driving back to Modesto in the car for a while. They stopped at the old In-N-Out. And unlike what Bueller would think a normal person in this position who'd just been arrested wouldn't be very hungry, he piped up and said, "I'll take a double-double with fries and a small vanilla shake." And that, according to the detectives, was another one of those red flags that started from the very beginning in this case against Scott Peterson.
A case that we are fortunate to have Ted Rowlands here to talk about so much of it, because Ted, I mean, you almost can't talk about the Scott Peterson case without talking about your reporting, your interviewing of Scott Peterson. Of course, that's my favorite part of these documentaries that have all dropped. The Peacock, Hulu expected, and Netflix as theirs. You're talking about what happened as it was happening there at his house, this case that just captivated everyone's attention.
Yeah, I was there the day after she was reported missing, and working up in the San Francisco Bay Area at the time. This was a case that didn't think it'd be a big deal as a missing woman, probably find her in a day or two. And it was sort of outside of our coverage area, but little did I know 20 years later, we'd be still talking about Scott Peterson as he tries to get a new trial. It's a huge long shot. And these documentaries are interesting because it's a fresh look at the case from two different executive producers. I know them both and have known them for years, and they do come at it from different perspectives.
Oh, what do we need to be paying attention to if you're watching one versus the other?
The Netflix one is a story of the crime, but also a real love story and a story of Laci and her family and the pain that they've gone through. And when you watch it, it's very apparent why the jury found him guilty. It's very apparent why 90% of the country thinks he's guilty, because his behavior was just off the charts strange, and that's what detectives honed in on right away. The Peacock one is more about the case, what's there, what isn't, the physical evidence, the hard evidence, the missing evidence, and that one might make you think a little bit, maybe not.
Yeah, of course, a case that got picked up by the LA Innocence Project. That's why we're now seeing it in the headlines now with this push for a new trial, and we're getting closer to a possibility, some decisions, right?
Yeah, there's a piece of duct tape that was on Laci Peterson's pants, and it is now at the lab. Both sides have representation there. It's a neutral site just outside of Los Angeles. Hey, if that comes back with something concrete, it could be a ticket for Peterson to get a new trial. Again, massive long shot.
Let's bring in someone else who can talk about this with us. Criminal defense attorney and former district attorney Matthew Mangino still standing by. From the prosecution side, Matthew, your thoughts on the possibility that we will see another Scott Peterson trial, no doubt, here on Court TV?
Well, I think it's important to kind of understand how this matter can even be back in front of the court again, because normally in a case where there's a conviction, you have direct appeal rights that you go straight to the appellate court, and then you have certain post-conviction rights that you can also use to get a new trial. It might be ineffective assistance of counsel and other evidence. In order for this case to get back in front of the court, you need some newly discovered evidence, and maybe this duct tape is that, or other situations that let the court actually take, a third or fourth look at a case. And you also have federal appeal rights, habeas corpus, when you can ask the federal court to review what the state courts did. So I'm sure that the prosecution is confident in this case. They're confident in what they presented to the jury. They're confident that appellate courts have upheld this conviction multiple times. But, the defendant, if there is in fact after discovered evidence, has the right to bring that evidence back in front of the court, and the court could determine whether that evidence was prejudicial or the lack of it in his trial was prejudicial and grant him a new trial.
His family has stayed behind him. His sister-in-law Janie went to law school and has made it her life's work on some level to try to free him and help and support. He, 20 years later, does have some support. Take a listen.
I believe my brother-in-law Scott has been wrongfully convicted of that murder. He's been in prison since April of 2003. Scott has not spoken on camera about the case in those 21 years.
And Matthew, the criminals that are convicted oftentimes go to their grave saying, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. And the net effect is it brings despair and a feeling from their families that they believe that their loved one has been incarcerated wrongly. And it's really a form of torture, is it not, when someone is holding on to this, I didn't do it. And, Peterson is saying he didn't do it. If, in fact, he did, it's unconscionable what he's put his family through.
Well, yeah, Ted, you're right. I mean, I wrote a book, The Executioner's Toll, 2010, about the death penalty, and the number of people who have gone to their death on a execution gurney, still suggesting that they're not guilty, I'm sure is so difficult for the family because they don't know, and they're fighting for their son in this case, and it's been almost obsessive over 20 years to continue this fight because he says he's not responsible. And, they've invested so much in this, and I'm sure it's painful for his family. But how about, Laci's family? How painful this is that this case has gone on now for 20 years. And here's a guy that just won't get out of the news, who's still in our face saying, I didn't do this. Somebody find a way to prove that. And so it's a tragedy for both families, and Laci's family especially, for having this case go on and on and on and on.
It's
Absolutely.
so true, Matthew. And you mentioned in your face. That's what we keep seeing. And the Peacock documentary is called Face to Face with Scott Peterson. Those interviews are so critical because I think people just want to understand who this person is, how he was able to get in front of TV cameras and claim innocence for all of that time. Let's take a look back to some more of this documentary because, of course, they wanted to talk to someone who had spoken with Scott Peterson himself.
This was a beautiful, pregnant, missing woman. On the surface, he did it, but how?
All right, just a bit of that there is all that we can show, Matthew. But hearing from Scott Peterson, it's important to those who may not understand this case. There's an entire generation that did not live through the Scott Peterson trial in 2002 and 2003. Talk about that part of it, Scott Peterson himself, and how people of a different generation may even view him differently than people did at that time.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're the defense in this case, you're trying now to create a narrative for people who maybe didn't know much about this case, didn't follow it closely, never heard of it. Young people who may be listening now. So you're creating this narrative. You're almost creating a defense for the court of public opinion. And that's what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to generate interest. They're trying to get people engaged. They're trying to get people to talk about this case again because, hey, it was 20 years ago. And, maybe that in some way has some influence public perception. Again, the Innocence Project working on this seems to have generated some issue. Hey, if they're getting involved, there must be something to this. So I think those are all important issues with regard to public relations, but we're still talking about a court case and the very specific requirements to have the court review your case again.
Indeed. And we should always point out it's the LA Innocence Project, not the National Barry Scheck Innocence Project. Much different. The track records are much different. LA Innocence Project, relatively new. But to your point, Matthew, they did look at the case and they said, we're going to represent him from here on out, thinking that he is, as their title says, innocent. We'll have to wait and see.